Okay, hello, I'm Lipat, and this is 100 Ways to Start a Song. And my special guest today is David Hamburger, a fingerstyle blues guitarist and teacher, but also a great songwriter that I've had the chance to write a few songs with. Hello, David, and thanks for accepting my invitation.
Hi, Lee. No, it's great. I'm really excited to do this.
Right. So on this channel, I like to talk about songwriting and the songwriting process. So I guess and starting songs with different ideas. So I guess my first question to you would be, what's your favorite way of starting a song?
Well, I am a big fan of the prompt, especially the verbal prompt. And so I will either, I've been part of different, I've been part of a song game, a weekly song group where one of the people sent out a prompt every week and everybody wrote to that prompt. When I do February album writing month, like we do in February, there have been years when I've used something called the Muse tool, where you can just get a bunch of random titles. I've done things where I will go and look at, I got one song out of, looking for random lists of things like, foreign films of 1945, just some random, and you can like finding a title and going, well, I'm going to reuse that title. The best prompt is when a phrase pops into my head during the week, either something I hear someone say or something I see in a book or in the newspaper or wherever, and I remember to jot it down. Or I do a weekly songwriters meeting now. It's an online meeting, but sometimes someone will say something during the conversation that we're having about somebody's song, or at the end when we're all just chatting, and sometimes someone will say like, oh, someone should write that song, and I'll think, that someone is me. So anywhere I can, if I can get like an opening phrase, and then, I also have other stuff lying around. A friend of mine, I don't use this that much, but a friend of mine whose wife is a teacher, and this friend of mine, Django, is a songwriter, he uses this thing called Storymatic, which is just cards you can pull out with characters and situations and stuff like that. It doesn't always work great for me, but once in a while I get something out of that. Or I have this guy, I've got this at a bookstore in Boston, which is just a book of cards with like, just again, like phrases on it. This one's, the set is called Small Pleasures. And these often don't really work for me, but I did get one last week where the phrase was whispers in the dark. And I think I ended up using that in like my third verse, and it made it into the song eventually. I tend to use more verbal prompts than musical prompts because I've been playing music longer than I've been writing songs. And so now that I'm saying this out loud, I'm realizing like I am sort of at a point where I could use some new musical ideas. But in general, when I started doing February album writing month, I was not able to write songs on purpose like I wanted to. And for some reason, maybe it was because of the Muse tool, or I don't know what, for that first February album writing month, I did almost all word prompts. And I found that once I had a phrase, the phrasing and rhythm of the words would give me like, my meter and my like some ideas for structure and for rhyme. And so I just started writing words first. And I realized that I had enough different musical information that I could almost be like two halves of a Broadway songwriting team. Like one guy would write the lyrics and the other guy would come along and write the music, except I was being both guys. So sometimes I'll get lyrics done and I'll be like, oh, well, let me try it this way now. Let me try maybe in this key, maybe let's, and I can kind of fool around with it until I find a place that it sits, which is why our collaborations were fun to do, have been fun to do, because I don't know if they've been fun for you. I've kind of just taken your words and gone like, well, let's do this with it. And you've always been like, sure. Whereas I think if I was probably sitting in a room with someone, there might be more pushback. But since we're doing it long distance or whatever, like, but I've sort of treated it that way. Like, well, here come the lyrics, and now it's my job to do the music in this particular case. Although I think I've done some heavy-handed rewriting once in a while. I think I've said like, hey, I changed the idea of your song.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know if it's because it's February album writing month, you just haven't had time to push back, or if you just were okay with it.
Well, we've always been pressed for time, but I've always enjoyed this sort of lyrical pushback, if you like, because you come up with ideas that I wouldn't necessarily find at all, and especially idioms and phrases like that. Like the last example that comes to mind was "hold down the corner of the bar," which was, I knew there had to be a bar in there somewhere, and I think I had a line with it, but you really nailed it. You really held it down.
I remember that line. Yeah, I'm curious. So, do you write in English always, or do you also write in, is it Flemish?
Well, no, I'm actually a Bulgarian by origin. And my first songs that I wrote like 20, 30 years ago were in Bulgarian. But after that, I studied poetry in English, and I started writing poetry in English. So for the last few decades, I would say it's been mostly English lyrics.
I mean, that's what I assumed, but I didn't know anything else about your background, because it's it's a remote thing, and so that's interesting about the idioms. I do love idioms, and it's a bit of a thing in my ongoing songwriting group, which is called the Underground Songwriters, where there is, I mean, there's a real tension in our group. Like, we try not to like write for the sake of writing. Like, you can't just get over on cleverness. Like, people are like, where's the feeling here? Like, where's the emotional content? But there is a great deal of appreciation for anybody who can take a known idiom and actually like corrupt it just enough that it's like got a little ache on the idiom. So I am sort of aware of that, and it's some. I mean, I read a lot of. I'm a huge fan of writing that is deeply idiomatic. Like, two of my favorite writers are P.G. Wodehouse and Damon Runyon, who are both. They have almost like their own idioms at this point, if you read them enough. But they were drawing so much on popular culture, but doing it in this very like sophisticated, high art kind of way. It's like a very like sort of flawless presentation of this very vernacular thing, which is definitely, that to me is like the gold standard as far as writing goes, because it's funny, but it's also hopefully, meaningful and all those other things too. So I definitely think words first, and musically, like, I definitely find myself falling into some of the same things over and over. So when I am looking at a new, like a couple of years ago, I got this new instrument that it's a 7-string guitar, like the jazz guitar player Charlie Hunter plays, where you can play bass lines and guitar parts at the same time. And it requires really separating your brain in half. And so I was trying to learn that, and I was also applying some of it to the guitar. And at that point, I was coming up with some things on the guitar that I didn't usually come up with. And so that did kind of give me like a music first way to think about things. But I sort of cooled off on that project a little bit. So I could probably use, some new prompts in terms of like coming up with more interesting chord progressions, coming up with, taking the groove in other directions, maybe thinking about the melody first. Every once in a blue moon, I'll sit down at a keyboard and do the melody first. And I definitely come up with stronger melodies when I'm thinking about them, rather than when I'm just kind of like, just seeing what comes. I think a lot about rhythm and a lot about phrasing. So I think a lot about groove, and I'm very, very, I'm very focused on the phrasing of the words, but not necessarily so much the melody of the words. That is kind of an afterthought. Excuse me.
But if I hear you correctly, even the words that you start with already suggest a groove and a rhythm, and which is part of the music. We don't usually think about it that way, but that's at least 1/3 of the music.
No, that was a big discovery, and I came to that through writing for February album writing month. That the rhythm of the phrasing of the words was like really like everything sort of projected out from that. Like, it dictated a lot of what was going to happen, whether I was conscious of it or not. And I've become a lot more conscious of it. And I can sit and write words without a guitar if I have a strong enough, if the verbal idea is rhythmically strong enough, and if it suggests enough of a picture of what's going on, I can sit and write without an instrument. Or I can pick it up for a minute and go, is this going to work? Oh yeah, maybe it's going to be in this key, maybe it's this feel, put it down, just, you know, just crank. And that way, because a lot of times I'm writing on a deadline, like, I mean, definitely during Preparate Album Writing Month, but also like, you know, I usually don't start writing my weekly song until 5:30 on Monday night, and we have a 7 o'clock meeting. So I have like an hour and a half to write a song, which means, you know, I can't be sitting there just like playing the first verse over and over and over again. It's like, once I get a verse, I got to write another one. And I got to write another one. I got to have time to go back. I got to be able to shuffle stuff. I got to be able to, you know, rewrite. And I mean, I could use a lot more. My newest sort of, you know, improvement that I'd like to make is to go back to more of these songs afterwards and rewrite them. I tend not to rewrite them until I'm trying to get enough songs together to record. And so I'm in that process right now, and I'm like, I got 9 keepers. Where are the other 3 going to come from? You know, like, and so I'm like trying to find ones that I think are strong enough that they're worth rewriting, but rewriting's brutal. So.
Yeah. Well, I guess I have 2 follow-up questions to that. Well, the first one is, once you start, and you probably answered part of it already, but once you have the initial idea, how do you develop it? What keeps you going? And when do you know that the song is finished? Like, how do you know when it's finished? That's my first question. And then the other one is, how do you know your keepers? But let's first answer.
Yeah, because that first question is really 2 questions, isn't it? And how do you keep going, and how do you know when it's done? I mean, the how do you know when it's done? I mean, the smarty pants answer is it's done when the meeting starts, or you know, or it's done when the
deadline strikes.
Yeah, I mean, that's a version that's done. It's probably not the version. But I do take that deadline seriously. Like, I never want to show up with something with placeholders. You know, I never want to show up with like, well, I'll finish. This is going to be the bridge. It's like, if I didn't write a bridge, then the song doesn't have a bridge, and it has to get over. And I don't say like, well, these last 2 lines are not the lines. I'm like, I try to get a song that I'd be willing to play in that period of time for the deadline. And if I can go back later and fix it and do it more, then I will. But I try to just get it, you know. But that does involve a lot of rewriting already. Like, I rewrite as I write. Like, I'll end up with like I'll usually end up with like a 40-page Word doc, because I'll just get the first bit and then I'll copy it onto the next page and I'll keep going, and then I'll copy that. And if I try to swap out a word or a phrase, or I start a verse differently, I can go back through every iteration. So sometimes in the meeting, someone will be like, hey, did you think of using this word? And I'm like, actually, I did. And I'll go back through and, like, you know, just to prove.
Control F, yeah.
But you know, this is the hardest thing, I think, is to keep motoring. And because to me, a song isn't done till the words are done. Like, I've never understood. I mean, I guess I understand it, but like a lot of people write the music. They're like, oh, I got this. I mean, I literally heard someone say to me once, oh, this song's done. I just have to write the words. What? Like, it's not done. At best, it's half done. But it's really probably only a third, you know. But to them, like, coming up with the structure and the chords and the riffs and the whatever, all the musical stuff, like that to them was the hard part. Then they were just going to write some words, and I was like, wow, okay. You know, maybe I'm being too cavalier about the music part, but I just feel like, you know, to me, like, the way that it gets done is, you know, like, get enough that, I mean, I know it sometimes takes me 2 or 3 starts. Like, I might throw out a prompt or throw out an idea or like try something and be like, oh, then this one's not working. I can feel when the opening idea is working for me. And sometimes it's just like a mechanical thing. Like, I'll go look in the rhyming dictionary and be like, there's only going to be 3 words I can use here. I'm screwed. Like, I could, you know, although I did write one song recently, I think I wrote it for February album writing month called Yesterday's Tomorrows.
Mm-hmm.
And I barely scraped out 3 rhymes for tomorrow. There was sorrow, there's borrow, and then my cheat was quarrel, which is, you know, it's not a perfect rhyme. And I really do. I mean, I grew up hearing my dad play Broadway songs, Cole Porter and Gershwin and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So I feel I actually was going through a couple of older songs and realized like I had let some things slide that I wouldn't anymore, but I really, really try for perfect rhymes. I really try not to do like time and fine and those kind of things, because it's like, you know, it's kind of like, I mean, my grandfather did the crossword puzzle in ink, and I have inherited that, you know, that tendency. So I'm just like, kind of feel like imperfect rhymes, it's like doing the crossword in pencil, you know, it's cheating. You know, it's like, you're gonna write a song, write a freaking song. Like get that. Also, like, you know, getting like the rhythm to scan, like not like wrenching things so that like you're emphasizing a syllable that shouldn't be, just to get the line to go. I mean, it just sounds really judgmental, but you really just, I'm like, if you're gonna play the game, you know, and don't, you know, be looking at the answers kind of. So when I'm writing, I will try to keep going. And one trick that I use a fair amount is like starting the second verse with either the same line as the first verse or a spin on that. And I mean, I use the online thesaurus. I use the online dictionary if there's a word I want to use and I'm not sure I got it using it properly. And I use the rhyming dictionary. I mean, so maybe that, I mean, I know some people like that's cheating. So everybody's got their own, you know, around this stuff. But sometimes I try to get into the song pretty far without a rhyming dictionary, but sometimes when I'm stuck, I'm like, well, what else rhymes with this second line? And sometimes I'll find some cool polysyllabic thing and I'll be like, oh, I didn't think of going there. Like I want it to go somewhere interesting, you know? One of the things, I think this is a later question, but I'm going to jump ahead because you made me think of it. One of the most helpful things I saw about writing was, you know, the guitar player and singer Kelly Joe Phelps, the late Kelly Joe Phelps. He played slide guitar on his lap and later just played regular guitar, but and he died really unfortunately young. But he said that he had a poetry teacher who said, when you shake the page, objects should fall off of it. You know, wheelbarrows and flowers and, you know, skyscraper, whatever, just stuff. Like there should be stuff in your song. And I found that really helpful, because I think one thing that made it hard to write songs when I was beginning was I wrote, you know, I feel this way and you are doing this. And I found it much more interesting to fill the song with stuff, that way you end up with images, you end up with pictures, you end up with like locations and scenes and you know, this kind of tangibility, which I love. And so there's this really fine line between a word that's interesting and a word that's distracting. Which is also something that like my friends and I talk about a lot. You know, it's like, you know, one of the big things that we'll each, you know, we'll play our song and then we'll put share our lyrics up on the screen, and then everybody gets like, you know, about 5 minutes of just feedback. And a really common question is, there are two. One is, do you care if people know what you're talking about in this song? Like, do you care that we didn't know it was about XYZ? Sometimes the answer is, I don't freaking care. No, it's like, that's what I wanted to do. And sometimes it's like, oh, you couldn't tell, let me go back and do some more work. And the other one is like, this is a cool idea or a cool word or a cool phrase or a cool metaphor, but it took me out of the song. Because meaning like I had to stop and figure out what you were trying to say, or I had to stop and go, I don't know that word. What does that word mean? So how far do you want to push your vocabulary or push your imagery before it takes someone out of the thing you're trying to do before it becomes distracting, basically. And that's, you know, that's different for everybody. And some people are like, screw it, my audience can come to me, you know, and some people are like total populists where they're like, I'm trying to write for everybody. I mean, I gave up on being an international sensation, you know, ages ago. So I'm like, these songs have to make me happy, and then they have to make like the 30 people that might come see me happy. And, you know, I'm not a mass market entity, so I can write however I want. But I also have taken songs out and played them 3 or 4 times that I thought were just great. I was like, I had so much fun writing it. I wrote it because I would have so much fun singing it. I think it's really a hoot. And people are just like I can tell, like the room just, you can feel like it's just not going over. And so I've had to go like, okay, I guess that is not as great as I thought.
Okay. But that gets to the next question. How do you know which songs are keepers? And well, what you're saying, it's a lot about feelings. If you get the story right, and if you get the story to feel right, and if you get the right objects in the song which connect the dots in the right way for you, then maybe well, that's if they do it for you, then it's already good. But then maybe you test it with the audience, and if it does it for them too, well, that's a bonus, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess you can tell by, it does take a certain amount of going out and completing the loop by playing it for people. I mean, February Album Writing Month is a very generous audience to post stuff for, right? I mean, I've almost never, knock on wood, watch it'll happen next year. I've never had anybody just like, take something down, or just be like, no way, this is not working, So it's given me a lot of confidence, maybe a certain amount of false confidence, because it's a bunch of songwriters who love songwriting, and, no 2 people are quite the same in that environment, even though there's thousands of people. So you show up doing something remotely interesting, and there's enough people that will say like, wow, this is really interesting. I'm glad I found you, which is, coming from the environment I came from, where it took me a long time to take myself seriously as a songwriter. That was really helpful for me. That encouragement was really helpful. Now I feel like, it takes it. I mean, that's one level of like, oh yeah, okay, that song's like doesn't suck, But then I have to take them out and do something with them and filter through them. And I do get keepers from doing February Album Writing Month. I mean, a record I made 2 records ago, this record called Pennsylvania Station Blues, I think 7 of the songs came from various February Album Writing Months, but not from one. It's like culled through like the first 4 or 5 years. And I got like 7 keepers. And then I had 3 or 4 that I had done from an early songwriting group I did with just a few friends when I moved to Austin. But they all came from that kind of environment. Maybe one came from me just like sitting down and going, I'm going to write a song today, which is how I used to do it, like just once in a while. And now I'm just like trying to do it all the time. So I'm trying to answer the question. So there's a song that I wrote for my songwriting group called The Heirs of Shangri-La, which was from a prompt. I might have even done it. I can't remember if it was also like a February Album Writing Month one, but it was definitely from a prompt. And I don't know if it was the entire phrase or if it was just something about Shangri-La or heirs, or I don't know, heir of Shangri-La, the singular, I don't remember. But I used that as my prompt, and I wrote this song. And as soon as I had that phrase, I was like, I couldn't maybe have verbalized it, but I knew I saw something very specific in my head. The minute I had the phrase, I was like, I know what that looks like. I know what I'm looking at. Time of day, location, just stuff. And so I wrote this song, and it all worked to me. And I was like, this is kind of, there's a lot of tangible specifics in that song, but it's also pretty vague. Like nobody, I mean, I made up this thing in my mind what the heirs of Shangri-La are, who they are. But I've been playing it, and I like playing it. And musically, I think it's actually pretty successful. And so I was planning to record it, but I wasn't sure. And then I was hanging out with some friends on Saturday. We were all over at someone's house playing music. And I usually don't play original tunes because I never realize till I'm playing them with people that there's some extra bar, or there's some place where I always do a stop or a break, and I forget to tell, it just, I think that they're very straightforward. Like, I'm like, this song only has 3 chords. And I'm like, oh, but I hang on this chord for an extra beat, or, whatever. So I don't usually play my own tunes at these things. I'll just play, old Western swing tunes or Texas songwriters, or just whatever I know that I think will be fun to play. But towards the end of the night, there was hardly anybody there. And someone was like, well, play that song again that I heard you play on Saturday. And so I played this, because I had a gig the week before. So I played this song, and everybody's like, oh, that's a really cool song. I was like, oh, good. I was like, because I wasn't, I liked playing it, but I wasn't sure anybody got it. And I always want to ask people, like, what do you think the song's about? And you kind of can't do that with like a whole audience. So you just kind of have to like just try to feel the room when you're doing them or when they're done or whatever.
Yeah, well, I don't necessarily think that it should be about the same thing for you and for other people or for the audience. I mean, as long as it does mean something to them, even if it's different from what it means to you.
That's true.
Because
That's true.
when you're putting all these objects on the page, you're essentially exciting neurons in people's heads. But the way they connect may not be the same way they connect in your head. And still, if they do connect and they light up, there is a sense of feeling of excitement and of something happening. And well, it speaks to them, even if it does not necessarily say exactly the same thing.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's not prose, and it's not nonfiction, and it's not an instructional manual. Mm-hmm. So it's been hard for me to let go of that. That like, as long as I get it written and put it out there, like I want to be responsible as a lyricist. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to I can't stand when I go to like, I used to go to a lot of open mics when I was getting started, and someone would always get up and be like, hey, I just wrote this new song. I don't know what it's about yet. Maybe you can tell me. And I'm like, no, go home and finish your song. Yeah. Like you should at least know what it's about. Yeah. Like I know what that song is about that I'm talking about. Some songs that I've written are incredibly clear. Like, I mean, they're written metaphorically or whatever, but it's really obvious what the song's about to everybody. And I'm just like, I can just do the song and there it is. But I actually like songs that are a little bit weird and mysterious. And I think the thing that hangs me up is that I play mostly solo. So it's not like Radiohead, right? Where like there's this entire world going on, one thing of which is some guy singing, and half the time you literally can't physically understand what he's saying, and the rest of the time, even if you can, you're not really sure what he's talking about, right? I mean, I've had this 20-year but like debate with my wife about where I'm basically like, I'm a Beatles guy because I know what they're saying, and I'm like I have no idea like what Mick Jagger is talking about, and when I can figure it out, I usually am not a big fan anyway, but I just have no idea what's coming out of that guy's mouth. She's like, it doesn't matter. People are responding to the feel of the song, to the feel of the record, to the whatever. And she's not a Rolling Stones fan per se, but she's just like, it's about a feeling. And I'm like, but they're singing. The whole song is a delivery system for a lyric. If I can't understand the lyric, why are we here? She's like, well, it conveys a vibe, whether you can understand it or not. I'm like, and she's pretty smart and writes good songs too. And like is a word person. She writes picture books, children's books, fiction. Like she's a verbal person. But we just have this completely, differing idea of like what the words are there for. And so I mean, if I'm standing there with a guitar and I'm singing, there's only two things going on, right? The words and the music. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like the words, they got to pull their own weight, And the other thing that I'm sort of working upstream against is that for better or worse, like, and I this will sound vain, but it's taken me 30 years to appreciate this. Like, I could stand up there and just play the guitar all night, and most people would be pretty happy. Mm-hmm. Like I'm a good guitar player, and so like the words don't have to be good because a lot of people will be perfectly happy to go like, yeah, the words, whatever. But the guy can really play. Did you hear that solo? But I don't want to like. I feel like that's cheating, and.
Well, that's because you play so well.
well, yes, and it's taken me a long time to accept that. Like that's a big part of what people find valuable. But I feel like I love words. I love the writing process. I love reading. I love good writing, and I feel like the audience deserves both. Mm-hmm. They deserve to get both, and so I want to make the lyrics as intelligible as possible. I mean, I'm not above writing like just a dumb, silly song. Like funny songs are one of my favorite things. And a lot of people think that they're the hardest thing to write. And what's hard about them is they're like a jigsaw puzzle. Like you can't have any throwaway lines in a funny song.
Mm.
Every song has to carry its weight. Every song is a punchline. And so it's just a lot more craftsmanship. You can't get away with anything in a funny song. But a good one, oh my God. I mean, Tom Lehrer or Mose Allison or, even Randy Newman or, I mean, or I mean, like I was saying, like, people like Cole Porter, those songs are freaking hilarious. They're great, like punchlines everywhere. When Cole Porter turns one of those like 3-syllable rhymes around or makes up a word, it's, or like Dr. Seuss, who's not a songwriter, but I mean, he writes verse. And the way that stuff lands, I mean, it's genius. And it's completely clear what those things are about. That's why they're funny, right? But there's a whole thing to humor and being unexpected, but sort of being satisfying and different at the same time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm a big Cole Porter fan too. And what I like, in addition to the music, because the music is part of it, obviously, in that era and everything.
Yeah.
Early jazz, but it's exactly his feeling for words and for the music of the words, and I mean, he can break a word into its syllables and make it sing, and that's a very special gift.
Yeah, all that songwriting, that whole era. I mean, and I don't think it's a coincidence. I mean, P.G. Woodhouse, like he worked on on Broadway, like in the early, before the sort of like before the golden era, but like in the late teens, early 20s, he wrote the lyrics for at least one tune that's relatively standard in that world, and he worked on all that kind of stuff. It's all word stuff,
Yeah, well, I get it. You're very lyric centered, and it carries a lot of weight for you. But because we're on this channel, I have to ask the next question, which is, where do you stand on music theory, and how big a part does it play, or if at all, in your songwriting? Like, do you see it as this invisible friend, or as this elusive foe?
Oh, definitely an invisible friend. I mean, and I've had a lot of students of various aspects of music over the years, and it's often a question like, well, do I have to learn theory? And I'm like, I don't know. Do you want to do it the hard way or the easy way? Do you want to like learn what the chords are in a key by going through every key on the guitar, playing every possible chord, figuring out which ones sound good, and then categorizing them and going, oh, look, the same thing happens every time. This one, that one, and this one sound good together? Or do you want me to just tell you now and save you like a year? Like, that's all theory is to me. It's just like, just save yourself some time. Like, these are your options. People, I mean, especially when I taught teenagers at this guitar workshop, and some of them were like into songwriting, and they'd be like, well, I just want to be original. I don't want to know like the rules. And I'm like, that's fine. But like, the rules are just somebody filtered out all the things that work the best and wrote it down for you. It's like, I mean, I struggled and struggled. I really wanted to learn, when I went away to college, I wanted to learn harmony and counterpoint. Just because I just thought, I want to know how that stuff works. I mean, I was already more interested in roots music than classical music, but I just, it seemed cool. And also mostly because one of my favorite guitar players was John Renbourn, and he knew all that stuff. He wrote, he had studied counterpoint from like the 14th century on, and wrote these beautiful, beautiful guitar compositions that didn't sound, I mean, they sounded like him, but but he was using, all the counterpoint rules. And I was like, well, I want to know how to do that. And I took the classes and I didn't really understand it. So I started learning again as an adult, maybe 5 years ago. Just learning how to write a 4-part chorale, learning how to write, 2-part counterpoint, and learning a little bit about orchestration and all that stuff. It's like, I don't have time to analyze 350 Bach chorales. I'd rather have someone tell me this is what Bach usually does. Same thing with, I mean, I learned theory because I wanted to understand, I took these classes in jazz improvisation, took them in college, took them in high school, private guitar teachers, whatever. And, And I do a lot of improvising, and I will just explain to people like who want to work on that. I'm like, it's just notes over chords. Like, what chord did you get? What notes are going to work over those chords? So, I mean, it's hard for me to think about if I consciously use theory or not, because it's pretty internalized at this point. If I'm in a key, it's like driving to the grocery store. It's like, there's 3 ways to get there from your house. And you're there before you even think about it. It's not like when you're a teenager and you're learning to drive. So it's like, if I'm writing, I'm like, I know I don't have to stop and go like, oh no, what's the 6th chord in this key? Is it minor? It's like, it's just there. And I mean, as a result, I have to actually kind of maybe work around it a little bit, because my hand, and also like my hands just have a certain amount of muscle memory. Like, they will go to certain things that are just ingrained. And so, I mean, the kind of theory that I think is useful at this point, if you're trying to vary the music, is to go like some of those prompts that we get sometimes, like a lot of the weekly prompts that people post in the album writing month challenge are like, write a song with a descending bass line, or write a song that uses a chord S out of the key, or write a song that changes keys, all that kind of stuff. You can't do that if you don't know what that means, But, at the same time, I'm just like, the weird thing about songwriting is that a lot of it uses the same stuff over and over and over again. And yet people find ways to do things that don't sound like the last one, which is kind of amazing. And so, there was an article one time in one of the guitar magazines that was like something like 20 songwriting things you can learn from the Beatles. And I was like, no, that's a theory article I can get behind, because that's still, I think, my favorite kind of songwriting. It's like, it absorbs so many things and then rearranged them in so many ways. And almost all of those songs pass the test of like, I mean, for one thing, all of those songs, to me, it's the final object that's so beautiful, right? It's the record they made, the way everything works together. I mean, someone once said, I had a teacher in college who was a jazz musician who said, a jazz album is like a snapshot. A Beatles album is like a movie. It's like you capture this thing, how people played, or you like construct this world, that the reality, you're inventing a new reality, not capturing an existing reality. So, but you can also still take those one person, sitting around the porch or the campfire can play Here Comes the Sun. And there's no synthesizer, there's no harmonies, there's no, 3rd or 4th, there's none of that stuff, but it still sounds like the song. Other songs maybe don't pass that test quite as well. But, most of the time you can take a song that is that produced of theirs and play the bones and it sounds like the song, I can't remember what the question was.
Yeah, it was about music theory and whether you use it consciously, unconsciously.
I mean, it's more like, I guess it's more unconscious and it's in there. And so I'm using it whether I mean to or not. There's just a simultaneity at this point. It's like when I pick up the guitar and I play a note and I go to the next note, I'm like, oh, that's the 6th of the key that I'm in. It's tangible at this point. Like the difference between a major 6th and a minor 6th relative to the root is just something that I feel and play and manipulate all at the same time. There are layers of that. I mean, there are degrees to which I cannot do that. I don't have the facility to play, like with the tempo and complexity of like Sonny Rollins, who I imagine has like kind of a 10-dimensional version of that. Like I've just got like the 1-dimensional version of it. Like I can play, blues and honky tonk and a couple other things. Like, and I know where I am and I know what it's doing and I can get to the next one. But if it gets too fast or there's too many chords, like that simultaneity goes out the window. I don't have the physical facility to make it happen. But
yeah, so I guess it's different degrees of internalization
yeah,
of those systems and structures and rules, as you said, and I agree with you that they don't necessarily um, question or prevent you from being original or remaining in the flow. And it just, I mean, it depends to what extent you have internalized them, but they can
well,
be
and
helpful.
I think people internalize what they need. Like if you want to play thrash metal, like you're going to internalize how thrash metal works. You're going to listen to like a bunch of albums over and over again, and you're going to write in that idiom using the rules of that idiom, which are different from the rules of bluegrass, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of things don't parse in terms of theory. Like this, I run into this all the time because I teach primarily blues. And every time we try to go through it, someone says, completely valid, they say, how can the one chord be a dominant chord? There's only one dominant chord in a key. It's the 5 chord. I'm like, I do this cartoonish 1 minute explanation. I'm like, okay, picture the Western Hemisphere. Here's America. We get a bunch of white people coming from Europe, and we get a bunch of African people coming from Africa. And these two sensibilities collide, and we get this harmonic structure from Western classical music, and we get this melodic and rhythmic sensibility from Africa, and they just get scrunched together. And now we have these rhythms and melodies, and even like to some extent harmonic sensibilities grafted onto the 1-4-5 structure of classical music. And you cannot completely resolve them one way or the other, because we have this third thing now where every major chord in a blues can be dominant, and it's still relying on this 5-1 relationship, and it's still relying on a certain kind of rhythmic flow that resolves to the next bar, but it doesn't. But the harmonies have been monkeyed with. You know, that's a very poor choice of words. The harmonies have been, what's the word I want? The whole thing is a synthesis now of these two sensibilities. I mean, and again, very cartoonish. There's a lot more to it than that, you know. But essentially, you just get this irreconcilable thing where you cannot make American music completely follow classical rules, and yet classical theory is the only thing we seem to have to explain. I mean, I don't know why we still kind of use that framework when really you could sit and look directly at blues and jazz and folk music and just make a new language around that. But that's how we do it.
Yeah, well, essentially, it's theory is a way of describing what is already there. So
yeah,
and
exactly.
Then you can use those rules and sets of ideas to communicate with your fellow musicians. Like you said, I have an extra bar here, an extra bar there.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm definitely in the theory as a tool, theory as a language, theory as a communication thing. Like, you know, I mean, that's really all it's for.
Okay, well, we're kind of out of time now, but I want to take this further, maybe a part 2.
Sure.
And in the meantime, are you up for a challenge? But
yeah, sure.
Like music first, songwriting challenge.
Okay, what do you got?
Pick a number between 1 and 54, because that's how many ideas I've published so far.
Okay, well, so do I need to use 54 because that's the last?
No, you just pick one number between 1 and 54, and then I'll tell you what that idea is from my list.
Oh, I see. I thought that I had to use the number 54 in a song.
No.
Okay. 36.
36. Okay. Well, I don't think. Let me see if I have the list here. Just a sec.
Gosh, that flew by. I can't believe it's 10 o'clock.
36. Okay, I'll find this very quickly for you. And then, of course, it's a phrase too, so you can use it as a lyric prompt if you like to. But of course, you can use it as a music first prompt. And the prompt is insert a V, which is something you know very well, I guess. the idea is to insert a dominant chord somewhere in your chord progression. It can be a secondary dominant too.
Okay.
But you can also take this as a lyric prompt if you like, and insert a V as a lyric prompt.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
And now I'm supposed to give you a prompt too?
Yeah, if you have one, I will write it down, and next time we meet, I'll have a song for you.
Okay, let's see. Let's go to the Storymatic. See what they give us. Okay. So this is there's a little more going on. So I pulled something called a wild card that says tell your story in the first person and pick another card. But I also got these two brown cards. So you can either use one or both of these. The first one is caught with an exclamation point. CAUGHT.
CAU, okay.
Or success at last.
Success at last. Okay. Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
I might have to write that one too. That looks like fun.
Yeah. Well, let's do this. I'm sorry I have to cut you off like this.
No, that's okay.
But let's meet again and keep the conversation going.
That sounds great. I'll happily do part two because we only got halfway through your list of questions.
Yeah. But thanks again for your time, David. And
Sure.
I'll see you again. And let's hear the songs we wrote next time.
Okay, that sounds great. All right.
Great. Cheers. Have a good day.
See you, Lee.
Bye-bye.